Jon Snow rose before dawn each day to greet the expansive sky over Volantis, shadowed by his immense dragon, Shadowfire. The creature had grown to an astonishing size, its wings spanning enough to eclipse entire courtyards. Under the watchful eyes of the Red Priests, Jon continued his training, honing his command of High Valyrian and deepening his connection with the Lord of Light's prophecies. Each sunrise, the fire roared within Shadowfire's belly, and Jon heard the stirring thunder of destiny. His name reverberated in temples across Essos. The rumored Targaryen, keeper of the greatest living dragon since Balerion the Dread. In time, whispers spread that the wolf-blooded Targaryen had tamed a monstrous beast dwarfing all known legends. Exotic markets buzzed with rumors of a black and crimson dragon towering over walls. The priests of Volantis, guardians of R'hlloreth's mysteries, welcomed Jon's bond with Shadowfire. They believed his ascension served a higher purpose. Sellsword companies traveled leagues to glimpse the spectacle, though none dared challenge such power. Under the guidance of High Priest R'hllio and Torym, Jon studied texts describing ancient sorceries. Nightly, he knelt in the blazing temple sanctum, forging a path of spiritual strength to match his dragon's prodigious, unfathomable might. Shadowfire's rapid growth soon exceeded even R'hllio's most optimistic expectations. Its wingspan extended beyond any recorded in the annals of Valyria. Sailors on the distant Rhoyne glimpsed its silhouette against the sky, likening it to a moving storm cloud. Though young, the dragon's roar shook the marble pillars of the Volantene docks. Jon discovered that Shadowfire craved open skies, so he flew it beyond the city's boundaries. High above the river, the beast exhaled vast pillars of flame. Merchants below gaped in awe and terror, uncertain whether to laud Jon as a savior or curse him for wielding unstoppable destruction. Driven by the temple's council, Jon undertook peacekeeping missions across Essos. He soared upon Shadowfire's back, visiting rebellious outposts along the old Valyrian roads. Regions terrorized by slavers found unexpected deliverance from the sky. On seeing the black dragons approach, captains surrendered or fled. Where negotiation failed, Shadowfire's flames enforced order. Jon, guided by conscience and the Red Priest's teachings, aimed to end cruelty without descending into tyranny. Over time, scattered city-states recognized him as a neutral arbiter, neither conqueror nor mere sellsword. Whispers labeled him the Ember King, though Jon never claimed any crown beyond necessity's demands or ambition. Along the Bay of Pentos, Jon brokered an armistice between warring factions. Rival magisters, fearing Shadowfire's wrath, agreed to a temporary truce. Freedmen welcomed his approach, for they saw hope in a Targaryen who aided the oppressed. Yet Jon faced moral dilemmas. Some slavers offered bribes, tempting him to preserve their vile trade. Others disguised cruelty behind polite diplomacy. He rejected all enticements. The Red Priests urged him to heed R'hlloreth's guidance, but ultimately, his own conscience steered him. In each territory, Jon insisted upon releasing captives. Should negotiations falter, one roar from Shadowfire typically resolved disputes without catastrophic bloodshed. In Slaver's Bay, Jon confronted the legacy of countless generations shackled beneath whips. He soared above Meereen's towering pyramids, Shadowfire's colossal wings blotting the sun. Many cowered, recalling stories of dragons wreaking havoc centuries past. But Jon demanded diplomatic dialogue with local rulers, offering them a stark choice: abolish slavery or face the might of living flame. A few rebellious masters tested his resolve, only to watch entire galleys reduced to ash. Freedmen rallied under Jon's banner, praising this new champion who would stand against oppression. Emboldened by Volantis's Red Priests, Jon envisioned a future free of chains, forever unshackled. Priests from Yunkai and Astapor attempted to sway Jon's approach, warning of rebellion's backlash. Yet he remained resolute. The Lord of Light's teachings inspired mercy but also demanded justice through fire. Whenever Jon toppled a cruel regime, he installed councils of freed citizens guided by local priests allied with Volantis's doctrine. Shadowfire's presence discouraged opportunistic tyrants from seizing power. Some nights, Jon wrestled with the moral weight of forging new orders across Essos, uncertain if he was overstepping. Torem counseled that the greatest sin was indifference, and Rallio affirmed that progress required forging steel under a fierce flame to burn. In those days, rumors of Jon's draconic power reached Qarth. Envoys from the fabled port arrived in caravans laden with gifts. They offered pearls, spices, and mechanical wonders, hoping to forge alliances. Jon met them cautiously. The Undying of Qarth reportedly possessed arcane knowledge, and the priests of R'hllor warned of illusions. Still, Jon valued peaceful trade over conflict. Shadowfire allowed the Qartheen to witness a fleeting aerial display, reminding them of his unmatched might. Impressed, they proposed joint ventures to enrich both realms. Despite lingering mistrust, Jon accepted their offers, determined to expand essential alliances without surrendering moral principles. As Shadowfire continued growing, some measured its length against that of Balerion the Dread. Veterans of the Golden Company recalled stories of Aegon's monstrous steed, but none had witnessed a living dragon to compare. Now, travelers insisted that Shadowfire's bulk outstripped even those legends. The beast's appetite was insatiable, devouring entire herds weekly. Volantis's priests ensured a steady supply, but Jon worried about sustainability. Maintaining a dragon of such magnitude required vast resources. Despite the challenges, Jon remained steadfast. He believed Shadowfire's existence was a gift from R'hllor, destined to change Essos for the better, if wisely guided and carefully nurtured. Volantis became Jon's temporary seat of power, though he never donned a crown. The city's elders recognized his influence, while the Red Priests ensured unwavering support. Shadowfire's flights above the Black Walls affirmed Jon's presence. Still, he refrained from subjugating the city as a conqueror would. Each temple sermon glorified the dragon's role in cleansing old evils, but Jon tempered their zeal. He strove to balance religious fervor with pragmatic leadership. Slaves in Volantis found slow reprieve, as officials feared offending the Dragonlord. Gradually, manumission laws trickled into effect. This incremental liberation mirrored Jon's cautious approach, sowing seeds of hope. From the newly freed corners of the city, Jon heard voices praising the Dragon of the Dawn, hinting at old prophecies about a hero reborn. Though flattered by their reverence, he knew the line between revered figure and tyrant was perilously thin. Each decision required balancing principle with the demands of governance. The Red Priests assisted, offering counsel gleaned from the fires. Torem sometimes claimed to see visions in Shadowfire's embers. Images of winter fields, direwolves howling, and flames dueling shadows. Jon listened, reminded that the darkness beyond the sea might one day require more than Essosi reforms. At times, letters from Westeros reached Volantis, carried by bravos or unscrupulous merchants. Jon read news of the War of the Five Kings, Robb Stark declared king in the north, Joffrey on the Iron Throne, Stannis marching beneath a flaming heart. Tales of Daenerys Targaryen, supposedly mother to 3 dragons, also circulated. Some priests speculated that she and Jon shared a destiny, but he chose to remain in Essos, bound by his oath to free the oppressed and guided by R'hllor's portents. The Dragon Queen, rumored to be forging her own path, seemed distant as a myth. Jon had immediate tasks here. On restless nights, Jon would stand atop a tall spire, gazing at the horizon where sea met sky. Shadowfire curled below, the glow of lanterns reflecting off its black scales. Ghost, the direwolf who had crossed the narrow sea with Jon, prowled the courtyard. Whenever doubt seized Jon's heart, he found calm in their silent presence. These two creatures were echoes of his divided heritage: wolf and dragon, ice and fire. He whispered prayers to the old gods he had once known, and to the Lord of Light who had embraced him in these foreign lands. Beyond Volantis, the Red Priests sent word of unrest in lesser cities. Crooked tyrants and fledgling warlords tested whether Jon's influence ended at the gates. It did not. Atop Shadowfire, he made flights across the Valyrian Peninsula, over the haunted ruins near the Smoking Sea, and into hinterlands seldom visited by outsiders. In many places, The sight of a colossal dragon subjugated local threats without bloodshed. In others, Jon had to unleash Shadowfire's furnace upon entrenched strongholds. Some condemned his show of power. Yet for every accuser, dozens knelt in gratitude for respite from vicious overlords. Once, near the old city of Illyria, Jon found a fortress harboring kidnapped children meant for dark rites. He freed the captives, delivering them to families or temple-sponsored orphanages. Witnesses described how Shadowfire's molten breath turned the fortress walls to slag. Survivors reported that the dragon's roar sounded like thunder from the dawn of the world. Jon emerged from the conflagration sooty and grim, haunted by the horrors he had seen. Torrum reminded him that evil thrived when good men did nothing, and that R'hlloreth's flame exposed hidden corruption. Jon struggled with the weight of each victory, uncertain how many more he could sustain. Commerce thrived in the aftermath of Jon's interventions, albeit with caution. Slave ports adapted their trade, forced to deal in fair wages or risk incineration. Merchants from Lys and Tyrosh ventured forth, bearing textiles, gems, and grains to a new Essosi network unshackled by fear. The Red Priests hailed these transformations as blessings of R'hllor. Despite lingering tensions, the name Jon Snow began to circulate in conjunction with prosperity and protection. Yet he refused fancy titles or golden thrones. Shadowfire served as his living sigil, a constant reminder of the might and potential devastation his presence carried. Inevitably, opposition formed. Ymir, powerful magisters who profited from covert bondage spat curses at Jon's expansions. They hired assassins from the Sorrowful Men, sending them into Volantis with stolen credentials. One night, a silent figure crept into Jon's temporary quarters, blade dipped in manticore venom. Ghost snarled, alerting Jon a heartbeat before the strike. A struggle ensued, ending when Torrum's fiery incantation lit the corridor with brilliant flame. The assassin perished shrieking. The incident hardened Jon's resolve while deepening his dependence on loyal allies. He recognized that not all opposed him from cruelty. Many simply feared losing wealth or power. In response to the threat, Volantis's Red Priests offered their best warriors as a personal guard. Jon accepted a small cadre led by a man named Narno, a devout follower of R'hllor skilled in sword and flame discipline. Narno's men wore crimson leather and carried obsidian-tipped spears rumored to channel the Lord of Light's power. The spectacle of their presence, the swirling red cloaks and flickering torches, underscored the seriousness of Jon's mission. Shadowfire, however, remained the ultimate deterrent. So immense was the dragon that onlookers whispered it grew an extra foot in length each week, surpassing any living memory or record. When free from official duties, Jon immersed himself in the temple's hidden archives. Guided by Torrum, a labyrinth of scrolls and codices recounted the rise and fall of Valyrian dragonlords, the incantations of long-dead priests, and cryptic mentions of Azor Ahai. Jon encountered references to an ancestral prophecy. A child of ice and fire would wield a flaming sword against encroaching darkness. He read about the forging of Lightbringer, hammered thrice amidst heartbreak and sacrifice. Some lines resonated ominously, stirring nightmares of White Walkers gliding through a frozen gloom. Yet even with Shadowfire's boundless might, Jon felt underprepared for that distant war. On the bustling docks, ships arrived daily from Westeros, bearing news of intensifying conflicts. King Joffrey's cruelty in King's Landing, the Red Wedding destroying the Stark hopes, the rumored death of Robb Stark. A pang of grief struck Jon. Though he'd never been acknowledged openly as a true Stark, the union of ice and fire within him felt more tenuous than ever. The Red Priests insisted R'hlloreth's path demanded he remain in Essos, forging alliances and liberating slaves. Jon's chest burned with guilt at the tragedies unfolding in the Seven Kingdoms. Each time the pang threatened to overwhelm him, he found purpose in Shadowfire's fierce gaze. As the months turned into years, Shadowfire's growth carried it beyond all expectations. The beast's head alone rivaled a small cottage, fangs curving like scimitars. Each wing could create a hurricane force upon downward thrust. Wherever Jon traveled, the land shook with the dragon's landing. In some places, peasants threw themselves flat, hailing the sign of a new dawn. In others, lords barricaded gates, hoping stone walls could repel a beast they compared to an airborne volcano. John never reveled in their terror. He strove to show mercy, mindful that unchecked might often transform saviors into tyrants. Despite the expansions of John's influence, Essos remained riddled with fractious politics. The Triarchs of Volantis, bound to maintain tradition, sometimes chafed at John's progressive edicts. Secret gatherings of old-blooded families plotted ways to reclaim power from the dragon bastard. They muttered that a Targaryen without a crown threatened ancient privileges. Meanwhile, extremist factions within the Red Priesthood saw John as a living instrument of R'hllor will, urging him to conquer all Essos in fire. Torn between the extremes, John brokered fragile truces through measured diplomacy. Shadowfire's looming presence ensured cooperation, yet the tensions simmered, forcing him to tread carefully upon political fault lines. One sweltering afternoon, emissaries from the Dothraki Sea arrived unexpectedly. A small Khalasar, apparently curious about the rumored giant dragon, presented themselves at Volantis' gates. Their leader, Khal Sorano, sought an audience with the man who tamed the Black Wind of the Sky. John welcomed them, offering respectful hospitality. The Dothraki watched in silent awe as Shadowfire soared overhead, casting an immense shadow across the city. Khal Sorano proposed an alliance. The Dothraki would patrol the caravans and keep roads safe from bandits if John's forces refrained from interfering in their customs. In return, they promised to abolish certain brutal raids. Though many priests distrusted any pact with the Horse Lords, John saw potential. He hammered out terms securing safer trade routes and curbing senseless pillage. In demonstration of mutual respect, John invited Khal Sorano to witness Shadowfire unleash flames upon a rocky outcrop outside Volantis. The Dothraki gasped at the sight of stone liquefying under the dragon's breath. That night, they feasted together, exchanging stories of ancient riders and primeval beasts. When the Khalasar departed, they carried rumors of the mightiest dragon alive, forging a new era where blood riders and freed slaves coexisted under watchful, fiery eyes. Within the Red Temple's sanctum, High Priest R'hllor guided John through deeper rituals. They lit grand pyres and chanted in Valyrian, seeking glimpses of the future in dancing flames. John saw visions, an immense wave of darkness rolling across a snowy wasteland, ephemeral figures locked in combat with shimmering swords. Shadowfire roared in the background, swirling embers forming ghostly shapes. R'hllor spoke of omens, convinced that Essos' transformation under John's hand was but a precursor. "Winter will come for us all," R'hllor intoned. "Only fire can stand against the ice." John's heart pounded with the weight of prophecy, recalling half-remembered tales from his youth. Seeking respite, John traveled north along the Essosi coastline. Shadowfire devoured miles in a single flight, crossing over petrified forests and abandoned villages. They alighted near the ruins of Valyria's outskirts, where volcanic vents spewed toxic fumes. Some said the ghosts of ancient dragon lords prowled these smoking pits. John felt a strange kinship with that shattered land. His own line, if Rhaegar Targaryen was truly his father, derived from those storied ancestors. He walked carefully among the cracked earth while Shadowfire prowled behind. Torrhen accompanied him, chanting protective spells against the lingering curse of the doom. Even Ghost hesitated, sniffing the ashen wind. In a half-collapsed library, John and Torrhen discovered fragments of Valyrian steel tomes and broken tablets. They revealed cryptic hints of a secret technique used by the greatest dragon riders, describing ways to forge an unbreakable mental link with a beast of fire. Torrhen interpreted these glyphs as proof that John's bond with Shadowfire could grow yet stronger, ensuring mutual survival in any calamity. Intrigued, John resolved to attempt the method. They built a makeshift altar of obsidian shards and invoked R'hllor's name. Under the swirling red glow of volcanic vapors, John placed one hand on Shadowfire's scaled flank, chanting the old words Torrhen had painstakingly translated. A surge of heat coursed through John's veins, as though the dragon's life force mingled with his own. He felt Shadowfire's heartbeat echo in his chest, hammering like war drums. The dragon's mind brushed his thoughts, a primal swirl of hunger and fierce loyalty. For one breathtaking moment, John glimpsed the world through Shadowfire's eyes, saw the swirling patterns of heat, smelled the tang of sulfur, felt the currents of wind under colossal wings. The bond stretched them both to a brink. When it ended, John collapsed to his knees, sweat pouring down his brow. Shadowfire nudged him gently, releasing a rumbling growl that sounded like concern. Torum helped John to his feet, exclaiming that the ritual had succeeded beyond expectation. John felt changed, as though his senses were sharpened by the dragon's presence. The old text spoke of such a bond as a double-edged sword. A rider who fell into madness could drag the beast into ruin, or vice versa. John silently vowed never to abuse their connection. He would not repeat the tragedies that had sometimes plagued the Targaryen line. Glancing upon Shadowfire's black scales, he recognized the gravity of carrying a power that could reshape realms, or plunge them into endless flame. Returning to Volantis, John discovered that weeks had passed. The city had endured new challenges in his absence. A cunning spymaster from Pentos had incited unrest, claiming John's dominion threatened local autonomy. Riots erupted in the city's less affluent districts. Rallio and Narno's guards managed to quell the violence, but tensions remained high. Upon his arrival, Shadowfire's roar above the skyline hushed the crowds in an instant. Many emerged from their homes, unsure whether to cheer or cower. John dismounted in the central square, greeting the populace with outstretched hands, reassuring them he sought not tyranny but peace. Yet in certain corners, resentful glances hinted that his power stirred both gratitude and fear. The days that followed showcased John's delicate balancing act, using Shadowfire's overwhelming presence as a deterrent, while striving to maintain an image of fairness. He convened open forums where citizens could voice grievances. Slaves, recently freed, lacked resources to support themselves, demanding urgent solutions. Nobles complained about lost labor and plummeting revenues. John enlisted the Red Priests to organize food distribution and new trade initiatives, bridging the gap between classes. At the same time, he dispatched Shadowfire on sweeps over trade routes, ensuring caravans moved safely. Gradually, some of the tension eased. Yet each passing hour reminded John that uniting a continent required unrelenting will. As part of his broader aim, John revisited Slaver's Bay. Marine, Yunkai, and Astapor had been liberated, but opportunists continued to exploit desperate citizens. Shadowfire's silhouette descending upon the pyramids rekindled both awe and dread. John called a council of former slaves, temple representatives, and local dignitaries. Together, they drafted an accord guaranteeing basic rights, fair wages, and shared governance. To enforce these principles, John stationed a rotating cadre of red-robed guardians, men and women devoted to lawless justice, each accompanied by a trained flamehound rumored to sense treachery. Though not all welcomed outside oversight, the memory of a towering black dragon scorching slaver fleets kept rebellious impulses in check. Meanwhile, envoys from Braavos arrived. They wanted to discuss commercial ties, urging John to consider the Iron Bank's significance. Braavos had built its power on lending gold to kings and expecting repayment. The bankers proposed funding development in the freed cities, on condition of certain guarantees and interest rates. John, wary of indebtedness, negotiated carefully. He suggested mutual risk ventures, leveraging Shadowfire's ability to protect shipping routes from pirates. The Iron Bank's representatives, impressed by the beast's presence, tentatively agreed. Yet John suspected their loyalty would shift if it proved more profitable. Still, forging financial stability was essential. Liberation meant little if famine followed. In quieter moments, John questioned whether his role as Essos's would-be savior was only a prelude. The Red Priests continued whispering about the Great Other, a menace beyond mortal ken that threatened to snuff out all life. Some insisted John must eventually sail for Westeros, uniting both continents against this cosmic threat. Others believed Essos alone required his flame, that the old world might burn away in inevitable conquest. John found himself at odds with these extremes. He had no desire to wage total war, nor to abandon a continent half-transformed. So he stayed, forging alliances, settling disputes, watching Shadowfire grow to a scale that made even the largest fortress walls appear puny. As time passed, ghosts of Valeria's might seem to echo through Shadowfire's every roar. The black-scaled dragon soared across skies turned golden by the setting sun, drawing crowds to rooftops wherever it passed. Sometimes, children in remote hamlets would chase the dragon's shadow, giggling in delight rather than cringing in terror. John found comfort in these simple scenes. Here was a generation that might know dragons as protectors. Yet he could not erase the memory of charred battlefields, the pungent stench of burned flesh. Each triumphant flight risked drifting into hubris, so he anchored himself by recalling the Red Priest's warnings. Power must serve a higher cause. News arrived of a new threat. A warlord named Hazrak the Crimson had seized control of a desert settlement, proclaiming himself immune to dragonfire through arcane spells. Rumor held that Hazrak sacrificed children to demonic entities. Unsure how much was true, John led a small expedition, flying Shadowfire to the remote sands. The settlement's walls were daubed with grotesque symbols. Hooded figures chanted from ramparts, mocking the dragon overhead. Sensing danger, Shadowfire circled with a low growl. When flames finally rained upon the defenses, a shimmering barrier flickered, briefly repelling the inferno. Startled, John recognized genuine sorcery at work. Torum chanted incantations, calling upon R'hllor to break the barrier. The crimson glyphs glowed angrily in the desert twilight. Shadowfire hammered the fortress again with molten breath. This time, the barrier cracked, arcs of energy spraying in all directions. Hazrak's followers shrieked as flames engulfed them. John guided Shadowfire to land within the collapsing gates, discovering caged prisoners and sacrificial altars. He freed the captives swiftly, then confronted Hazrak himself, a gaunt figure with glowing tattoos etched into his skin. The warlord brandished a cursed blade, chanting a guttural incantation. Before he could strike, Torum's conjured flame lashed out, incinerating him in a flash of acrid smoke. That night, the desert settlement lay silent, embers drifting on a warm wind. John felt no triumph, only relief that the captives lived. Torum examined Hazrak's remnants, proclaiming his sorceries akin to shadow binding. The Red Priest insisted that evil powers lurked across Essos, remnants of ancient darkness. John realized anew that dragons alone could not extinguish every vile magic. Religious faith, cunning allies, and unwavering resolve were just as vital. They escorted the rescued families to safer territories, ensuring local councils would help them rebuild their shattered lives. Shadowfire's presence kept opportunists at bay. John departed at dawn, resolved to remain vigilant against hidden threats. During his return flight, John spotted something alarming. A roving legion of Sellswords flying black banners, marching purposefully across the plains. Scouts reported they numbered in the thousands, armed with siege engines. They had been hired by an alliance of wealthy magisters who wanted to challenge John's dominion. Sensing open war, John consulted with R'hllor and Torum. The priests insisted that confronting such an army would demonstrate R'hllor's power. But John disliked the thought of unleashing devastation upon conscripted soldiers. With Shadowfire alone, he could kill them by the hundreds, yet he sought a less bloody resolution. John resolved to parley, hoping to avert mass slaughter. He flew to the Sellswords encampment, intentionally landing with theatrical impact. Dust billowed as Shadowfire settled, wings folding like massive gates. Soldiers quaked, horses whinnied in terror. John demanded to speak with their commander. A tall, scarred woman named Karana stepped forth. She claimed she owed fealty only to gold. Her employers wished to break John's influence in Slaver's Bay, reasserting old power. John calmly explained that any attempt at open warfare would yield horrific losses. He offered them triple the pay if they pledged to protect freed communities instead of destroying them. Skeptical, Karana tested John's sincerity. She pointed to a row of battered prisoners her men had captured. If your mercy is genuine, claim these wretches, she challenged. John approached the prisoners, scanning their faces. Most were common folk. Quietly, he cut their bonds, feeding them water. Meanwhile, Shadowfire loomed, exhaling a hot gust that flattened tents. The cell's wards watched, tense and uncertain. Karana's eyes darted, measuring the odds. A single wrong word could prompt a draconic inferno. At last, she nodded grudgingly. Pay us, Targaryen, and we'll fight for you. John suppressed a wry smile. Perhaps gold could buy a measure of peace. Returning to Volantis with the mercenaries behind him, John arranged their payment through a combination of temple funds and new trade revenues from Qarth and Braavos. He stationed them strategically around liberated cities to deter other opportunistic armies. Karana's men grumbled, but the presence of Shadowfire silenced dissent. In time, the Sellswords realized that defending communities earned them admiration rather than fear. Some even found purpose in patrolling trade routes, collecting legitimate wages. Though friction persisted, John considered it a guarded success. Another potential war had been resolved with minimal bloodshed, reinforcing his belief in negotiation bolstered by overwhelming force. Amid these undertakings, Shadowfire's unstoppable growth continued. Observers swore that it overshadowed entire fortresses with ease, each wing beat like thunderclaps. John himself felt a deeper connection to the dragon than ever before. When Shadowfire soared, John could sense shifting air currents as though they brushed his own skin. The beast's roars reverberated in John's bones, half exultation, half warning. High Priest Rallio compared the dragon to an unstoppable comet, blazing through Essos' sky. Guide it well, the priest often reminded him, lest the flames consume us all. John repeated those words like a mantra, refusing to let pride lead him astray. Encounters with scattered tribes, city-states, and merchant enclaves shaped John's evolving leadership style. Each region had its own customs, from music-filled lists to the austere hovels of the Painted Mountains. Where possible, John embraced local traditions, forging bonds through respect rather than coercion. Only when confronted by entrenched cruelty did he unleash Shadowfire's savage might. Thus, the Black Dragon became both sword and shield, an agent of fear against oppressors, and a symbol of hope to the powerless. Through it all, Ghost padded beside John, the lone direwolf a steadfast link to the north he had left behind. On quiet nights, John would rest his hand on Ghost's fur, remembering the halls of Winterfell. Inevitably, conflicting claims reached John's ears regarding Yunkai's governance. A faction insisted that the city, though liberated, still languished under covert slaver influence. The freed population demanded immediate retribution, urging John to let Shadowfire purge the corrupt officials. Others warned that violent upheaval could cripple Yunkai's fragile economy. Torn, John convened an open tribunal. Citizens testified about hidden slave pens and clandestine auctions. Furious, John confronted the city's self-styled council, discovering forged documents that concealed illegal transactions. Realizing talk alone would not suffice, he declared that a thorough reckoning was due. Shadowfire's presence during the final inquiry ensured no official dared lie under oath. One by one, slaver conspirators faced swift judgments. Some were fined into destitution, forced to disgorge ill-gotten wealth to the city's rebuilding efforts. The worst offenders were exiled, escorted beyond Yunkai's walls with minimal rations. A few tried bribing the guards, but Narno's red-robed enforcers did not waver. Without crossing the line into wholesale slaughter, John ensured Yunkai's bureaucratic rot was excised. Freed citizens rejoiced at this demonstration of justice without unbridled carnage. Yet John saw the exhaustion in their eyes, the decades of cruelty that could not be erased overnight. Shadowfire roared triumph overhead, stirring fear among those who might consider future treachery. In the aftermath, John found himself increasingly revered as a figure bridging mortal realms and divine fire. The Red Priests preached sermons praising Lawloress Chosen, attributing each victory to the guiding flame. Devotees lit candles in shrines dedicated to John's mission, chanting for liberation across Essos. Though flattered, John felt uneasy about deification. He was no god, nor a perfect savior. His nightmares reminded him of each life lost under Shadowfire's flames. He confided these doubts to Torum, who counseled humility as the best shield against fanaticism. "Keep your eyes fixed on the people's welfare," Torum said. "Let the flames guide, but never blind you." Eventually, representatives from all corners of southern Essos gathered in Volantis for a grand conclave. The meeting, orchestrated by Rallio and other influential figures, aimed to formalize alliances, resolve border disputes, and draft shared principles for trade and justice. Delegates arrived from Lys, Myr, Pentos, Karth, the Dothraki Sea, and even remote Lazer. The proceedings took place in the sprawling amphitheater below the temple's watchful braziers. There, beneath flickering firelight, various parties voiced grievances and proposed treaties. At intervals, Shadowfire circled overhead, a silent reminder of the power behind Jon's unspoken veto. Tensions flared, deals were struck, and night after night, the city was alive with debate. Jon presided, not as a king or supreme ruler, but as mediator, a role legitimized by the dragon perched atop Volantis's highest tower. When arguments reached impasses, delegates would glance upward at that hulking silhouette, mindful of the consequences. Torum and Rallio guided religious aspects, ensuring each pact acknowledged Lawlor's principle of delivering justice. At the same time, Jon insisted on practical steps, measures to protect freed populations, rebuild war-torn roads, and ensure equitable taxation. Skeptics grumbled, but the fearsome presence of Shadowfire overshadowed dissent. In time, the conclave produced a written covenant, signed by the major powers, pledging mutual support and a commitment to stamp out slavery. The night that covenant was finalized, the temple launched a grand ceremony. Thousands gathered in Volantis' squares, carrying torches in a procession. Priests chanted, illusions danced in the flames, and a hush fell as Jon, astride Shadowfire, soared overhead. The dragon's roar reverberated off the black walls like rolling thunder. From high above, Jon watched an endless sea of flickering lights, thousands of upturned faces. He realized how far he had come from the lonely bastard of Winterfell, how deeply fate had woven him into the tapestry of Essos. Yet a subtle pang of longing stirred in his chest, whispering of half-forgotten snows and the North's ancient ways. Amid the festivities, Torum approached Jon with urgent news. A messenger from the Jade Sea had arrived, carrying warnings of strange raids on coastal villages. Survivors spoke of pale invaders who moved silently, leaving no bodies behind. The messenger's words were garbled by terror, but references to eerie cold winds set Jon's heart pounding. He recalled the half-remembered threats beyond the wall in Westeros, the White Walkers of old tales. Could something similar be stirring across the sea? Rallio and Torum advised investigating. Jon agreed, steeling himself for what might be an even darker truth. He led an expedition southward, flying across the shining waters toward the rumored attack sites. Shadowfire's immense wings cut through the humid air. Ghost clung close, stowed on a supply ship that followed. After days of travel, they found abandoned villages strewn with shattered huts. There were no obvious corpses, but a bone-chilling frost clung to the interior walls. Scorch marks suggested some inhabitants had tried to repel attackers with fire. Jon's breath clouded in the unexpectedly cold air. He had known desert heat and scorching flames, but this creeping chill felt unnatural. Torum muttered prayers, unsettled by the silence. They eventually found survivors hiding in a partially collapsed temple dedicated to a local harvest god. The refugees, trembling with fear, described pale figures emerging at night, eyes gleaming like winter stars, draining life from anything they touched. They called them the Cold Ones. In the dim corners, Jon listened with mounting dread, recalling old Nan's tales of White Walkers. But these were Essos's twisted reflection. Some might call them Whites or Ice Wraiths. The survivors had no precise name. The notion that an icy threat lurked here stirred Jon's protective instincts. For all his reforms, monstrous powers might undo everything if left unchecked. Shadowfire's flames proved somewhat effective against the Cold Ones when they staged another raid soon after the expedition arrived. That night, under a wan moon, eerie shapes glided through the outskirts. Jon commanded the dragon to unleash a scorching inferno. The intruders recoiled, hissing in inhuman voices. Yet they were nimble, scattering into shadows with unnatural speed. A few unlucky ones were caught in the flames, collapsing into smoldering piles. But more survived, slithering away into the darkness. Jon and Torrum realized this enemy required more than a single fiery assault. They needed deeper knowledge of how these creatures operated and where they laired. Over the ensuing weeks, Jon coordinated a systematic defense. Shadowfire patrolled from above, while Red Priests on the ground maintained perimeter fires. Narno's guards set up a ring of torches around each settlement, an idea borrowed from stories about Whites hating flame. Though the raids lessened, they did not cease entirely. Each small victory exacted a toll. The Spectres learned to exploit gaps in the defenses. Jon debated calling on more allies, Bravos, Karth, even the Dothraki. Yet fear of panicking Essos's population stayed his hand. Most had only just begun healing from slavery and war. Spreading rumors of a supernatural cold threat could unravel the precarious unity he had built. At last, an elderly priestess named Erisha arrived from the remote temple of Cinderlight. She claimed ancestral knowledge of the Cold Ones, describing them as ancient foes from a bygone age, drawn to pockets of magical energy. According to her, the presence of a grand dragon, Shadowfire, might have awakened these creatures as they fed on life's extremes. Jon was aghast, realizing Shadowfire's power might have inadvertently stirred dormant evils. Determined to end the threat, he followed Arasha's guidance. She led him to a windswept promontory laced with labyrinthine caves, rumored to be the heart of the Cold One's domain. A sense of dread permeated the frigid air, distinct from any natural chill. Shadowfire landed atop a jagged ledge, the stench of ice and decay filling Jon's nostrils. Torrum and Erisha chanted spells of protection. Ghost bared his teeth, hackles raised at the unseen presence. In the cavern's depths, faint glimmers of blue light flickered. Suddenly, pale forms surged forth, shrieking. Jon commanded Shadowfire to saturate the entrance with flame, turning rock walls incandescent. For a moment, it seemed enough. The Cold Ones scorched and dissolved. But more kept emerging as if drawn by some central force. Erisha instructed Torrum to seal the caves with a powerful incantation, requiring living flame and blood. Jon felt a tremor of dread. Such magic carried great cost. Yet no alternative remained. While Shadowfire kept the Cold Ones at bay, Torrum and Erisha etched symbols in the ashen rock, chanting in unison. Erisha sliced her palm, letting blood drip onto the glowing lines. The symbols flared, weaving a fiery barrier deeper within the caverns. The howls of the Cold Ones intensified, their forms flailing against the swirling barrier. Finally, with a final incantation, the passage collapsed in a cataclysm of rubble and molten slag. The shrieks cut off abruptly. Echoes lingered, then faded to silence. Erisha slumped, barely conscious. Torrum clutched his side, pale with exhaustion. Jon reached out, stabilizing them both. Emerging into the cold moonlight, Jon inhaled the crisp air, feeling an odd serenity. The immediate threat was sealed away, though he suspected some might still roam free. At least the main hive was entombed. In the distance, Shadowfire roared triumph, the flames lighting up the dark sky. Villagers and freed folk gathered at a cautious distance, cheering in relief. Jon felt both gratitude and heavy responsibility. If the Cold Ones had indeed stirred because of Shadowfire's aura, what other unintended consequences might follow his draconic expansions? He resolved to remain watchful, leaning on the Red Priests for arcane vigilance. Returning to Volantis once more, Jon found the city in the midst of a festival celebrating the newly inked treaties. Huge banners of red and black fluttered from spires. Freed citizens danced in the streets alongside traveling merchants, forging an atmosphere of cautious optimism. Even the Triarchs had lowered taxes modestly, Observing the celebrations, John felt a strange ache. So much had been achieved. Slavers broken, wars averted, monstrous threats subdued. Yet he wondered if destiny's currents would eventually carry him back to Westeros. The watchers on the wall faced the White Walkers, or so the stories said. He felt the pull of that looming threat across the sea, an echo from his childhood nightmares. High Priest Rallio recognized Jon's turmoil. In a private audience, the old man placed a hand on Jon's shoulder, offering measured words. "You have done much for Essos, perhaps more than any mortal could in one lifetime. Yet the flames show another path calling you west. One day you must answer. We will not chain you here if R'hlloreth's call compels you back." Jon closed his eyes, recalling images of snow-capped mountains, gray stone battlements, and a father's stern voice. "Not yet," he whispered. "I can't leave them yet." Rallio inclined his head. "Then remain as long as you must. The Lord of Flames has no single domain." In the following weeks, Jon concentrated on reinforcing the alliances forged at the conclave. He coordinated with local councils, ensuring the newly freed populations had farmland, tools, and trade links. Soldiers under Khara's leadership patrolled trade routes with surprising diligence. Braavosi bankers visited again, delivering coins and scribes to strengthen commerce. The Dothraki roamed near caravans, chasing off bandits in exchange for fair tributes. Meanwhile, the priesthood of R'hllor expanded, building new shrines dedicated to the Lord of Light's vision. Volantis' skyline blossomed with flickering flames at night, each in homage to the dragon who soared overhead like a living testament. A delegation from the Summer Islands arrived, bringing vibrant plumages and exotic timbers. They requested permission to study Shadowfire's shedding scales, hoping to glean knowledge of draconic biology. Jon granted them limited access, as Shadowfire occasionally shed fragments of its underside. In return, the islanders pledged precious medicines and sturdy woods for shipbuilding. Some priests claimed these materials could craft vessels strong enough to brave any sea journey, even an eventual crossing back to Westeros. Jon stored that possibility in the back of his mind. Though he remained committed to Essos, part of him wondered if he might one day require such a vessel, especially if the rumored threat of the others demanded a united front. Occasionally, new arrivals from Westeros sought Jon out, drawn by tales of a Targaryen with the largest dragon in existence. A handful of knights from the Stormlands, disillusioned by the chaos of the War of the Five Kings, offered their swords if Jon would pledge to retake the Iron Throne. He refused, explaining that his mission lay in Essos' liberation and stability. "I am no king," he told them. "My cause is to break chains and prepare for a darkness beyond simple thrones." Some left disappointed, while others stayed, intrigued by the notion of a cause greater than courtly politics. Shadowfire's awe-inspiring presence encouraged them to believe Jon might indeed have a grander destiny. Yet the road to unifying Essos was never smooth. Rumors emerged from the western port of Caia that local priests of an ancient deity resented R'hlloreth's spread. Religious fanatics attacked a caravan belonging to Volantis, burning trade goods and scrawling curses on the sand. Jon responded swiftly, flying Shadowfire over the mountainous passes. He arrived at Caia gates, seeking peaceful resolution. The local priesthood refused to open negotiations, claiming their goddess abhorred foreign flame. Tensions escalated. Rather than incinerate the city outright, Jon stationed a blockade, preventing trade while sending messengers daily, hoping to avoid a siege. Diplomacy eventually prevailed, thanks to a moderate priest within Caia who recognized the futility of isolation. A fragile agreement was reached, allowing passage for goods in exchange for Jon's vow not to impose R'hlloreth's worship. Though uneasy, the pact held. Late one evening, as Jon walked along the torchlit corridors of the Red Temple, Ghost at his side, he encountered Torrhen kneeling before a brazier. The priest stared intently into the dancing flames. Jon sensed tension. Torrhen explained he had glimpsed something unsettling. A swirl of ice crystals, a rotted crown, and a looming silhouette that might be the Night King from Northern legends. This vision was followed by an image of Shadowfire gliding over a sea of frozen waves. Torum believed destiny would ultimately draw Jon westward. But not yet, Jon repeated, half to reassure himself. Essos still needs us. As months wore on, the daily tasks of governance became more routine. Freedmen established trade guilds, agriculture flourished in regions once ravaged by war, and slaver strongholds lay abandoned or repurposed as communal storehouses. Under the watchful presence of Shadowfire, even the most reluctant city-states abided by the anti-slavery pacts. With each passing season, the dragon grew more gargantuan, a living legend overshadowing anything recorded since the days of old Valyria. Jon's circle of advisors, Torum, Rallio, Narno, Khorana, helped manage the sprawling territory. Even so, Jon made regular journeys to outlying areas, determined to remain a visible guardian rather than some distant ruler. On one such journey, an unfamiliar tug at Jon's mind pulled him to the skies. Mounting Shadowfire, he soared above desert plains and rolling hills. The bond he had forged in the volcanic ruins vibrated with urgency. The dragon's primal instincts sensed trouble. After hours in flight, they spotted a massing of armed men near the Painted Mountains, raiders from unknown origins. Without hesitation, Jon descended, Shadowfire's roar shattering the calm. The raiders scattered, discarding weapons. A local village emerged from hiding, cheering. Another crisis thwarted by a single draconic appearance. Jon offered the villagers supplies and medical help from the temple caravans. The cycle repeated, intimidation balanced by compassion. In the aftermath, an old villager approached Jon hesitantly, pressing a carved talisman into his palm. It bore the likeness of a dragon and a dire wolf, entwined in a spiral. "A dream told me you'd come," she whispered. "Said the wolf and the dragon together protect us from the cold that devours souls." Jon felt gooseflesh prickle. He thanked her, tucking the talisman into his pouch. That night, in the campsite beside Shadowfire's sleeping bulk, he turned the carving over in his hands by firelight, pondering the weight of fate. Was every step he took in Essos part of a grand mosaic he could not yet see? From Qarth came new entreaties. A powerful warlock claimed to possess knowledge of dragon sorcery lost since the Doom. He invited Jon to visit the House of the Shifting Whispers. Remembering Daenerys Targaryen's rumored troubles with Qarth's warlocks, Jon proceeded with caution. He arrived to find illusions masking labyrinthine corridors. Torches sputtered, revealing glimpses of purple-lipped figures whispering half-truths. At the warlock's behest, Jon performed small feats of will, directing Shadowfire's flame to swirl in mesmerizing patterns. The warlock smiled enigmatically, offering cryptic warnings about the cyclical nature of draconic births and the creeping shadow that devours the sun. Unimpressed by riddles, Jon refused to linger, departing Qarth with minimal trust in their arcane promises. Through it all, High Priest Rallio maintained unwavering support. He oversaw the expansion of R'hlloreth's faith but gave Jon latitude to govern in a practical manner. With each conquered challenge, Rallio reminded him of the bigger picture. These mortal struggles shape the land for now, but the Great War lies beyond. We must stand ready. Jon nodded gravely. He had not forgotten Torum's visions or Arash's warnings. The ephemeral hush of victory in Essos could be shattered by something far worse if winter's terrors swept south. Thus, he doubled efforts to build unity. The freed cities, as some now called them, formed an alliance unusual in Essos' fractious history, tied together by treaties, commerce, and fear of the Black Dragon. Occasionally, Khorana's Sellswords encountered pockets of slavers who refused to surrender. She reported capturing a handful of Targaryen loyalists among them, exiles who believed only a Targaryen king in Westeros could restore the old order of dragons and subjugation. It was a grim irony, for they saw Jon as a betrayer to his true cause of conquest. He met them personally, explaining that House Targaryen's heritage did not mandate slavery or brutality. Some spat at his feet, calling him a half-breed bastard unworthy of Valyria's mantle. Others trembled at the sight of Shadowfire's massive form, realizing this was no mere pretender. Jon banished them, refusing to stoop to torture or execution for misguided zeal. Between these episodes, simpler joys emerged. Children thrived in newly built schools, taught by temple-sponsored scribes. Freed farmers harvested abundant crops along the Rhône, trading with once hostile neighbors. A sense of hope radiated through many corners of Essos, fragile yet tangible. John found moments to laugh with Torrum, to watch ghosts chase rodents around temple courtyards, to appreciate the swirling colors of Carthene silks. Yet overshadowing all was the unspoken truth. If the ultimate darkness approached, how long could these fragile blossoms of prosperity last? In the heat of summer, an emissary from Noth arrived, a gentle-spoken woman bearing a letter from the Butterfly Isles, describing plague-afflicted refugees in need of help. That very day, John loaded a ship with healing supplies gleaned from the Summer Islands and Lycene apothecaries. Shadowfire could not cross seas so readily, so John arranged an escort of war galleys instead. Another puzzle in the mosaic, bridging seas and cultures to save lives. The days of petty slaver skirmishes felt distant whenever John saw communities cooperating for the greater good. Even the Triarchs, once mired in tradition, contributed coin for relief efforts, aware that the dragon's favor was priceless. Time and again, John was asked if he would claim a formal throne. Some red priests burned braziers in his name, whispering of a dragon emperor. Others insisted he must marry into a prominent Essosi house to solidify alliances. John deflected such suggestions, focusing on the day-to-day tasks that demanded his attention. Marriage, crowns, and pageantry felt trivial compared to confronting creeping evils, fostering stability, and preparing, perhaps, for an eventual confrontation with the far greater threat rumored in the frozen north. If any title mattered, it was the intangible bond between rider and dragon, forged in flame and tempered by trials. Late into another long night, Torrum found John in the temple's highest tower, staring at the distant horizon. "You'll depart someday," the priest murmured. "Lawloress embers tell me so. Whether you sail west or fly, that day will come." John closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. "I know," he admitted, "but not while there is still work here." Torrum placed a hand on John's shoulder. "Essos is not yet saved," he agreed. "Though you have wrought miracles, slavery still festers in hidden corners. Monstrous powers stir beneath cursed sands, and humankind's greed knows no bounds." John nodded. "Then I'll stand vigil a while longer." In that moment, Shadowfire soared past the tower, wings blotting out the moonlight. The dragon's roar crashed like a tidal wave over Volantis. Citizens who heard it might have felt awe, comfort, or trepidation, each reaction revealing the complexities of John's role. He was not a conventional ruler, nor a typical conqueror. He was a man shaped by two worlds, raised in the cold of Winterfell, yet inheritor of the Targaryen flame. The greatest dragon since Balerion now eclipsed all known bounds, forging a legend that spread from the Shivering Sea to the Summer Isles. In the weeks that followed, more pockets of resistance flared and fell. Pirates raiding the southern coasts vanished after Shadowfire scoured their hidden coves. A rebellious ex-slaver named Mallows tried to rally an army, only to see it scatter at the dragon's approach. The freed city's council occasionally bickered, but none dared challenge the sweeping transformations. For each crisis resolved, new possibilities arose. Expansions in farmland, scholarships for bright orphans, and roads linking trade hubs once torn by wars. John observed all with a measured detachment, determined never to lose sight of the people's needs. Still, certain priests whispered that the final shape of Essos rested on the unwavering might of the Black Dragon. Shadowfire had become a cornerstone of the temple's narrative, a living, fire-breathing sign of Lawloress dominion. John accepted this role, though he quietly reminded them that worship of the flame should uplift humanity, not oppress it. Rallio concurred, cautioning younger zealots that the Lord of Light's path aimed at saving souls from darkness, not chaining them to fear. This balance between reverence and reason was delicate. John walked it daily, aware that a single misstep might birth a new tyranny as terrible as any slaver's whip. On a scorching evening, John visited the city's newest public forum, a grand square built atop what was once a slave market. Vendors hawked fresh produce, artisans displayed crafts, and minstrels played lively tunes. Freed children ran between the columns, oblivious to the tragic history beneath their feet. The transformation stood as a testament to what could be achieved through determination and the looming deterrent of unstoppable draconic power. John breathed in the mingled scents of spiced meats and blossoming night flowers. Perhaps peace was possible after all, if only for a fleeting generation. He had begun to think of the freed cities as more stable than Westeros, an irony given Essos's historically tumultuous nature. But that very night, letters arrived carrying ominous tidings. Rumors from beyond the narrow sea suggested winter's grip was tightening, that unnatural snows blanketed the north. King's Landing faced chaos under King Joffrey's cruelty, or so the reports said, though the details grew murky with rumor. Some claimed dragons were again active near the Red Waste, presumably Daenerys Targaryen, forging her own destiny. John read these accounts in silence, heart pounding. The final letter spoke of White Walkers, dismissed as myth by many, sighted near the wall. The next morning, John stood in the temple's courtyard as Shadowfire bathed in the sunrise. Torches from the night's vigil still flickered. Ghost lingered at John's side, ears alert. Torrum approached, reading the concern etched on John's face. "Darkness is stirring," John murmured. "My family, my home, may face threats no southern king understands." Torrum hesitated. "Will you go?" John's gaze shifted to Shadowfire's colossal form. "One day," he said softly, "but the hour is not yet ripe. If the others threaten the living, Essos might need to stand united with Westeros to stop them. For now, I remain here, ensuring these freed cities do not collapse. When the time comes, I'll answer the call." Torrum nodded. They both gazed at the horizon. A warm breeze carried the sounds of hammers building new structures, merchants shouting deals, the bustle of life in a city reborn. Above it all, Shadowfire stretched its wings, scattering brilliant rays of morning light. The dragon's presence had changed everything, forging an era few would have imagined possible. Slavers trembled, free folk rejoiced, and an ancient faith kindled fresh hope. John, the unacknowledged son of Rhaegar Targaryen, had become Essos's improbable champion, bridging flame and compassion. High Priest Rallio joined them, robes rustling. "The day will come, Jon Snow," he said gravely. "The flame has shown us winter's hand. When you depart, we shall hold these lands in your name. Yet do not linger if the fires beckon you west." Jon nodded, gratitude and apprehension mingling. He knew the cost of his choice. Leaving a realm he had painstakingly guided toward freedom, venturing home to a place that might still brand him traitor or monster. But fate seldom offered easy roads. For now, he would keep forging Essos's better path, trusting that Shadowfire's unmatched power would help preserve the fragile unity. Weeks blended into months, the freed cities continuing to stabilize. Trade routes flourished, new alliances blossomed, and slaver remnants retreated into the shadows. Every so often, John took Shadowfire on extended flights to remote corners, verifying no hidden cruelty festered unchallenged. In one such expedition across the Bone Mountains, John encountered a caravan of refugees fleeing rumored warlords in the Far East. He guided them to safer territory, providing escorts and supplies. Some worshipped him as a prophesied figure, half terrified, half adoring. He responded by insisting they were free to chart their own destinies. Shadowfire's might existed to shield, not to subjugate. Meanwhile, the priests engaged in dialogues with other faiths, from the great shepherd of Lazer to the scattered worshippers of the many-faced god. Occasionally, friction arose over theological points, but the abiding presence of the Black Dragon compelled a veneer of respect. Khorana and Narno oversaw discreet missions to stamp out slaver enclaves. Each success was reported back to John, who approved funds for rehabilitation and local governance. Gradually, an administrative framework emerged. It was not perfect, nor free from corruption, but it offered more justice than Essos had seen in living memory. Far from complacent, John remained ever aware that unanticipated dangers could erupt. Word drifted in of necromancers along the southern coasts, of shadowbinders from Ashai dabbling in dark arts. the memory of the Cold Ones in the Jade Sea lingered. To address these threats, John sanctioned small contingents of red priests trained in exorcism and flame-based wards, dispatching them to trouble spots. He personally visited the Jade Sea region once more, verifying that the sealed caverns remained shut. Though uneasy about the breadth of mystical threats, he took comfort in the knowledge that Essos was not alone or helpless. A network of Watchers, Templars, and local defenders had risen under his impetus. When at last another winter chilled the northern latitudes of Essos, the freed cities experienced a harvest bountiful enough to sustain their people. They credited wise planning, but behind every mention lay gratitude for the dragon's protective shadow. The name Shadowfire became legend, recounted in taverns and traveling performances. Poets sang ballads about the man with Stark blood and Targaryen fire, forging an era of improbable peace. John accepted their praise with humility, never forgetting the price paid in lives lost to secure this fragile realm. One evening, after a grueling round of negotiations with quarrelsome nobles from Myr, John retired to the highest terrace of the Red Temple. There, above the city lights, he let the wind brush his face. Ghost sat quietly, ears twitching at distant sounds. Shadowfire perched on a broad stone platform, rumbling softly. John ran a hand along the dragon's jaw, feeling the heat emanating from every scale. "You're bigger than any living creature on this continent," he mused aloud, voice tinged with awe and trepidation. The dragon blinked slowly, exhaling a plume of smoke. In the swirling shapes, John imagined glimpses of swirling storms, roving undead, an iron throne forged from swords. He heard footsteps behind him. Torum approached, offering a small scroll. "A messenger from Pentos delivered this. They say skirmishes have broken out again near the Norvos border. Slavers testing the new laws." John's jaw tightened. There would always be more to do, more fires to quell. He opened the scroll, scanning the contents by torchlight. With a resigned nod, he glanced toward Shadowfire. "Then let's remind them the price of breaking chains." Torum bowed, stepping aside for John to climb onto the dragon's back. Ghost waited, tail swishing. Another flight, another challenge, more lives to protect. The cycle continued. As Shadowfire rose in a flurry of dust and sparks, the city shrank beneath them. Moonlight bathed the beast's gargantuan form, revealing scars from countless battles. Yet it remained indomitable, swirling with raw elemental energy. John guided the dragon over Volantis' walls, scanning the roads below. Torches glimmered as caravans moved steadily, trusting in the safety his watch provided. John felt pride, tempered by the knowledge that he was no ruler in name. He was a caretaker, guarding a land that had endured centuries of oppression. Tonight, he would push that boundary further, ensuring more people found the freedom they deserved. Miles vanished under Shadowfire's wings as they sped toward Pentos' outskirts. John's mind churned with strategy, potential negotiations, or if necessary, the fiery demonstration that would break any budding rebellion. The freed cities must remain a bulwark of liberty, a testament that dragons could serve justice rather than tyranny. In the hush of the night, he thought of Ned Stark's voice teaching him honor, and of the Targaryen blood surging in his veins. He held them both close, forging a path that neither parent's legacy could have foretold. When dawn broke, the horizon gleamed with possibility. Ahead lay challenges, new alliances, and lurking dangers. And somewhere, across the sea, an even darker fate might be stirring, awaiting the day Jon Snow would return to Westeros. For now, though, his duty lay in Essos, championing the voiceless and safeguarding the freed cities. The colossal dragon beneath him, a living flame that dwarfed all known beasts, symbolized hope as much as fear. Together, rider and dragon soared over the plains, carrying with them the promise of a future shaped by justice and tempered by mercy. Jon pressed forward, unbroken in resolve, dedicated to the realm he had claimed with flame and conscience, determined to wield his unparalleled power for the good of those who had long suffered in silence.